What's up, guys? The NFL draft is fast approaching, and today I wanted to give a detailed look at the Chicago Bears' biggest needs heading into the NFL draft and how our needs line up with the strengths and weaknesses of this year's draft class. Currently, after pick number one, the Bears only have three other draft picks: pick number 9, pick number 75, and pick number 122. Meanwhile, our biggest needs on this roster are pretty well documented. We need another pass rusher. That could come at defensive end or defensive tackle. We need more help on the offensive line, especially at the tackle and center position. And we desperately need at least one more wide receiver. And I've spent an exhausting amount of time researching this year's NFL draft. I've talked about how deep this year's receiver class is, but today I wanted to visualize that for you guys by showing how many players I have in the top 100 for each of our positions of need. My top 100 is weighted a bit towards the Bears' needs, so it might include a few players seen just outside of most analysts' top 100, but I've done that intentionally. With another pick at 122, the Bears could be looking to add three players from this list after drafting Caleb Williams. I've listed wide receiver, offensive tackle, defensive end, defensive tackle, guard, and center on the screen. These are all players listed in my top 100. There are 19 wide receivers listed, 15 offensive tackles, 11 defensive ends, 10 defensive tackles, 7 centers, and just 5 guard prospects. This should really help visualize just how much talent there is at the receiver position, especially when compared to other areas of need. Let's talk a bit about each one. Starting at wide receiver, I can't talk enough about how many talented wideouts there are in this class. My top 100 doesn't even list Jermaine Burton, Luke McCaffrey, Jacob Cowing, Johnny Wilson, or more. The wide receiver class is just stacked beyond belief. So even though I do really want one of these studs near the top of the board, I'm perfectly fine not taking a wide receiver early as long as we grab one or two before the draft ends. Although I still really want Rome Odunze, my day two sleepers at wide receiver are Javon Baker, Malachi Corley, Brendan Rice, and Malik Washington. And then moving on to the offensive tackle class, it's just another position that has a lot of depth as we head into day two as well. It's not nearly as deep as the wide receiver position, but the first round is just completely stacked. I think we could break the record for most tackles taken in the first round of the NFL draft. This class is extremely top heavy, but there are a few sleepers that could fall into day two. My guys to keep an eye on are Patrick Paul out of Houston and Kieran Omega DJ out of Yale. And then let's take a look at the pass rushers. This year's group of defensive ends is intriguing, but it's definitely nowhere near as good as the wide receiver or offensive tackle class. I have Darius Robinson listed at defensive end and defensive tackle because I believe he's the one guy who can play anywhere on the defensive line, which is why he's one of my favorites in this year's class. The talent on day two at defensive end is full of upside with some question marks. After the first round, it won't be long before this position falls off a cliff. The depth is just not there. Marshawn Nealon, Jonah Ellis, and Austin Booker are my sleepers at defensive end. And then let's get to the interior of the defensive line. This defensive tackle class. Two guys really stand out on top of the class, Johnny Newton and Byron Murphy, but I think there's a ton of depth at DT as well. Even outside of the top 100, guys not listed here like Tavondre Sweat, Dwayne Carter, Leonard Taylor, Christian Boyd, and a lot more. I'm starting to really like this year's defensive tackle class. It's not quite as top heavy as defensive end is, and I currently have one less defensive tackle in my top 100 than I do DEs, but I believe there is more depth on the interior of the D line, especially after the top 100. The defensive end position falls off pretty quickly, but when it comes to defensive tackles, there are some guys we should be able to find even as we go into day three of the draft. And then we get to the interior of the offensive line. I actually really like this year's center class, but the guards are weak. I have 7 centers ranked in my top 100, more than most draft pundits, but only 5 guards made the list. Now, to be fair, I did spend an insane amount of time watching this year's group of centers, And I think all 7 of these guys offer the upside to be starters in the NFL. And with our perpetual need to upgrade the center position, I would love to snag one of these guys on the list personally. But when we look at the guards, it's just not an impressive group, unless you're counting tackles that could move into guard or centers that could play center or guard. But with just how insanely deep this year's wide receiver position is, paired with the depth at both offensive and defensive tackle and even the center class, and there's just so many different ways we can go in this draft. If we really want to look at defensive end, it might have to come in round 1 though, especially since we don't have a pick in round 2 right now, and the talent will drop off well before we get to pick 75. But that got me thinking. The defensive ends fall off before 75, but defensive tackles don't. So if we do take a wide receiver or offensive lineman in the first round, we should still be able to get a defensive tackle to help supplement the pass rush in round 3. The other idea would be waiting for next year's defensive end class, which is much better, at least on paper. Polls could then take advantage of the strength of this draft and come away with help at receiver and on the offensive line. I believe that by supplementing the pass rush by adding to the interior of the defensive line would do enough to help our pass rush until we get another edge rusher next year. But that's just it. The Bears could be in a position to land the best pass rusher in the entire draft at pick number 9. If other teams go all offense or maybe even a cornerback comes off the board, the Bears could get the best defensive player in the draft at a position of great need by staying put at pick 9. The options in this year's class are just endless, and Poles has given himself plenty of flexibility as we head into the NFL draft. Today, I just want to take a few minutes to show you guys an outline of how deep this draft class is at our biggest positions of need. I've talked a lot about it, but I think seeing it visualized on the screen can help this make more sense. This is something Ryan Poles in the front office have definitely been discussing for a while now, and I'm curious to know how you guys feel about it. Let me know in the comments. I have a lot more videos on the way. I appreciate everyone who watches. Please remember to hit that like button for me. And until next time, bear down.
How you doing? Jaquan Brisker, Chicago Bears safety. I just want to shout out to Swift at Swift Sports Network. Keep up the hard work. We appreciate you. Keep working hard. Subscribe to Swift Sports Network. And shout out to all the best Bear fans in the world. Bear down. Let's go, baby.